Okay, I think we will go ahead and get started. Everyone can hear me? Okay. Hi, good afternoon and welcome to Mog Library's virtual Meet the Author session with Sarah K. Stevens. My name is Cassie Nesper and I work at Mog Library. As you can see, Mog staff is working from home right now, but we do have a live chat box available on the Mog Library website during our usual semester hours. And many resources are available through our website, like research databases, subject guides, and ebooks. So please let us know if you need any help. Now on to our event. This event will be recorded and I will post it tomorrow on the library's YouTube channel, and it will also be available on our Facebook page. Sarah K. Stevens is Sarah Hollowatch Collat. She's from Canfield, Ohio. She is a YSU University Scholar and graduated summa cum laude in 2003 in psychology. Sarah went on to earn her MS and PhD in developmental psychology from Penn State University. She is currently an associate teaching professor at Penn State University in the Department of Human Development and Family Studies. Her academic courses focus on infancy, childhood, and adolescence, with special topics examining autism spectrum disorders and developmental resilience. She is also the author of 3 novels, using her psychological training to craft darkly human stories with killer twists. Aside from her novels, her writing has also appeared in College Teaching, The Writer's Chronicle, Hazlitt, and The Millions. When she's not plotting death and betrayal for her characters or lecture notes for her students, Sarah found enjoying the pleasures of country life with her husband and children in central Pennsylvania. So with that, I will turn over the presentation to Sarah. And let me see. How do I make you the presenter?
We practice this, but then despite practice, it's hard to find the button, isn't it?
It is. Oh, darn it.
Let me see. I'm trying to think.
No, what does this do? Oh, I'm so sorry. I knew how to do this.
I wonder if it's something on the bottom tab there with the different participants, or maybe more options.
Under participants. Oh, so Angela, you're telling me I can make her the host?
We'll get it sorted here.
Oh, and it wasn't this. Oh, this way. No, that's just the chat.
Oh, no.
Oh, no.
When Sarah speaks, she does become the principal person in the screen.
In the screen, right. But then there's also a way I can make her the presenter so that she can share her her slides with us.
Okay, well, tell you what, why don't we just try
working on that, Sarah?
I have a share option here, and I can see if everyone's able to view it. Let me go ahead and click share. Here, and you know what? It won't. There we go. Share screen. All right. How's everybody doing? Are you guys able to see the PowerPoint that I have up there?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Well, wonderful. Then we're all set. So I'll just kind of talk, and that'll kind of pop my little video up at the front, but it'll toggle between everyone. And Cassie, if you end up finding the setting in the midst, feel free to interrupt, and let us know. But I'll go ahead and get started. I made a very brief PowerPoint just to kind of highlight some things and share some awkward adolescent early writing pictures too that I thought you might enjoy. As Cassie mentioned, I am a proud alum of YSU. Both my parents are graduates of Youngstown State. I met my husband in high school, but we are both YSU scholars and alums of YSU. So we are a big Youngstown State family. And today what I wanted to share with you is just a little bit of background about my journey through YSU on into my academic, but also my writing career. And just a little heads up, there's not a very brief, actually fairly extended pit stop at Mogg Library for 4 years doing a work study, which was fantastic. So let's go ahead and shift through there. And I am just doing the presentation. There we go. So who am I? I know Cassie explained a little bit, but just in brief, as I noted, I have my psychology bachelor's in '03, spent a lot of time in DeBartolo Hall, and that's in part where my novel, It Was Always You, is set. So it was nice to relive a lot of these campus experiences when I was writing that novel in particular. I'm also a developmental psychologist at Penn State. I'm in the College of Health and Human Development, focusing on human development and family studies. That's our department. And I teach quite a few different undergraduate courses focusing on child development with, as Cassie mentioned, some special topics interests looking at development and support for individuals on the autism spectrum and looking at developmental resilience. So I teach about, I'd say about 500 undergraduate students each semester. And it's been quite a shift moving to remote learning this past last several weeks, but oh gosh, students are just incredible at YSU, at Penn State. That undergraduate enthusiasm really comes through. I'm also the author of 3 psychological thrillers. Go figure, I'm a psychologist who's writing psychological thrillers. And I often joke that in my work, we focus a lot at, in Penn State and HDFS in our department on normative, healthy development for human beings. So how do we encourage through infancy on into old age, healthy development and support that? And in my novels, though, I tend to go to the opposite end and look at and explore a lot of dysfunction and intrigue and disconnection between things. And you can see there are 3 novels. My first was published back in 2016 with a small press called Pan and Moon Publishing. And my second 2 have been published through Bloodhound Books, which is a larger publisher from the United Kingdom. And they're all thrillers with lots of people behaving badly, and it's lots of fun, I hope, too. Now, before all of that writing, before YSU, before all that academic training, I was in power of the pen, which if you grew up in the Youngstown area, maybe you're familiar with this, or just in the Northeastern Ohio area. It was this wonderful opportunity. It went from elementary school on through middle school. This is a picture of me in 8th grade. And here, I'm going to take my cursor. There I am. I know it's a little blurry because it's actually a Polaroid that has been scanned in by a friend of mine who's also in this picture and had posted on Facebook. And I thought, I need to snag that picture. But Power of the Pen was a writing competition we do on the weekends. And we would go as a team from Canfield Middle School, and they would give you prompts that you would have to write a story in, I think it was under an hour. And every year I would try this every weekend that the competitions were running. And finally, in my 8th grade year, I got I won one of the awards at the end of the competition at one of the ceremonies. I was just so excited to have this Power of the Pen trophy because I'd worked years and years to get to that point. And I would be really remiss if I didn't mention just all the wonderful teachers I had guiding me through and helping me build as a writer in my early years. And especially I was part of this special English program from Hilltop Elementary on into middle school, and it ended in 8th grade. And Mrs. Lippiott, who, if maybe you grew up in the area and you know of Mrs. Lippiott, she was my English teacher for that entire time. So I got to work especially with her. And I know I am the writer I am today in large part because of her encouragement and support. So thinking about my journey more so in my adult years rather than looking at my awkward adolescence, just to walk you through what I had been able to do in getting to this point of being a published author with a publishing house. So first off, I had short stories published that I would send out, and there are a lot of online magazines that are currently having calls for submissions. And I remember I had finished my PhD, I was teaching full time, my husband and I had adopted our 3 children, and my children are getting a little bit older, and I realized, oh, I had this little bit of pocket of time. And I remember proctoring an exam to my students, where you get a lot of time to think to yourself when you're proctoring exams, if you've ever done that, because you're just kind of looking at your students and kind of providing encouragement as they're taking the exam. And I had this little germ of an idea for a short story pop into my head, and I found myself writing it later on that evening. And I was able to find a home for that short story and several other short stories. And from that, I started to build a bit more of my writing confidence, creative writing, because I hadn't done that since I was an undergraduate and working on my English minor in DeBartolo Hall at YSU. From there, I started to work on this idea for a first novel. I walked to campus and back from my house. I'm lucky that I live close enough, and it's about a 20-minute walk. And when I was walking, I would start thinking about these ideas for this story, for this novel. And it eventually came. I wrote in really small chunks, and it eventually became my first book, which is called A Flash of Red. And it's set on a university campus and focuses on a psychology professor that has, again, all this drama happening in her life that is certainly not reminiscent of mine. It's more of a, kind of a, not a fantasy, but it's this catharsis, really, when you're writing about the darker human nature. So it took 6 months of querying to find a house, find a home for it. But I ended up partnering with Pandemonium Publishing, which is a small press in Texas. They published the novel, and really not much happened from there. I tried to do, it was a small press that encouraged authors to do most of their publicity work for them. And it was hard because I was, working full time. We were raising a family. I didn't want to invest a ton of my own money, and I was hoping for more support from my publisher. So when it came time to look for the home for my next novel that I had written, I decided to look for another publishing opportunity. In the midst of all of this querying, is what it's called, where you send out information novel to agents and publishers. I had written some other essays and short stories, and you can see the little list there where they've been published. And so if you're interested in reading some of my nonfiction, those are the places where they've been featured most recently. And then about a year ago now, I queried Bloodhound Books, which I mentioned is primarily a digital publisher. That's a bigger piece of genre fiction, which is what I write, since I write thrillers. And they're based in the United Kingdom. And I sent out my query, got a follow-up email, had a couple of phone calls, and we signed this 3-book contract. And I'm 2 novels in. Got It Was Always You, which is the one set at YSU, and The Anniversary, which is focusing on a honeymooning couple in an isolated luxury cabin in the Poconos, where all sorts of drama and intrigue ensues. And I'm working on my 3rd novel now, which, go figure, is at least what I'm writing right now is focusing on a family in quarantine. It's in a mansion somewhere out in the Pennsylvania wild, so it's not my family in particular, but certainly there's some maybe emotional themes that are coming up in my writing. And that brings me to talking about the lessons that I just wanted to share with you briefly before we turn it over to Q&A. So lesson 1 that I can take away from my own writing journey, which is still continuing, thankfully, is that there's really no replacement if you want to write for actually writing. There's a lot of good effort that you can put into doing research or just thinking through your plot or thinking through your characters. But really, what you got to do is you just got to sit down, you got to put the time in, and you got to just get the words out. So what I find I do, and I'm doing this now during our self-isolation, social distancing in particular, I'm very rigid about it because that's what works for my personality, is I set a daily word count. When you're going to write a novel, it can feel really overwhelming because you're trying to hit a certain word count. You're thinking, oh, it's 70,000 words, 80,000 words. How am I going to get there? How am I going to tie this all together? But if I find if I parse it into, okay, 1,000 words a day, 500 words a day, and some people might work better where they're going week by a weekly goal, but just getting the words out, even if you have to fix a lot in editing, I find it essential. And just to be forgiving of yourself as you're writing. So that brings me to lesson 2, silence your noisy inner critic. I have a lot of writer friends that I've met online or in workshops, and some of them just feel really overwhelmed. They find that they can't write because they're so critical of the writing, and they'll tell me that they deleted everything that they wrote the last week or the last month, or they deleted an entire book. And I just wanted to go, no, don't delete it. You know, that's effort, that's work, that's art that you're creating, even if it's not the necessarily best that you think you can do. And just to remind yourselves that you can fix almost anything in edits. So get your ideas out there, have that catharsis too, because writing is something that we do not just because it's a job or because we want to sell books, we do it because we enjoy it, because it is an art form, it is a craft. And to try and not forget that and not be bogged down by other aspects of this business of writing, remember to enjoy it and to not be so judgmental of yourself. So speaking of judgment, everyone, if you ask them, will give you advice about how to improve your writing, how to improve your book, how to fix the plot, how to make characters better, how to make it more of a page turner, et cetera, et cetera. And what you have to remember is that there are so many different types of books and stories because there's so many different types of readers. You're never going to please everybody. You're never going to make everybody happy or write the book for everyone. And so learn to trust your instincts and learn to invest in your instincts. I find as a writer myself, I know when I'm doing a good job. I know when the book is going where I want it to go. And it's okay if not everybody loves it. What I hope is that the particular readers that I'm writing to or for, you know, for this particular genre or this set or style of characters, who are perhaps readers like me, because I tend to write what I like to read as well, that the book will be engaging for them. And for somebody who likes a different style of character or writing or set piece, there are other books for them. And I don't need to, quote unquote, fix it necessarily. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that we can't improve. That's something I strive for every day, is to get a little bit better, to hone that skill more. Again, being compassionate to myself at the same time. So finding trusted mentors that you can work with in writing workshops or online coursework, or through your own educational training. I had some wonderful professors at YSU, Phil Brady, Mike Finney, Professor Phil Brady, Professor Mike Finney, Professor Sherry Lincoln, to name a few. But also to focus and find what we call beta readers, who are readers who will read your manuscript and give you feedback, informed feedback, before you send it out to agents or out to publishers. And it's funny, I found my beta readers not necessarily in my close social circle, although I will admit my mom is still my very first reader. As soon as I finish a manuscript, it's like, whoop, I email it to my mother, and she's such a good mom because she reads it right away. And I mention that too because in a lot of my books there are mother issues, and my mother's always joking that, you know, I'm not the mother in Sarah's stories, and it's very, very true. But to find these readers that can give you feedback about your story and how to improve it before you are ready to send it out into more of a critical audience to review it and potentially get published. And then finally, this is something that has come up in my own work just as a human being and focusing on mindfulness, is asking yourself, what else does it do for you? And this was something I had to pause fairly recently just to ask myself that again about my writing and some of the other work that I do that I also started because I enjoy it so much. So what does writing do for you besides, giving you positive feedback from other readers, or selling books, or, getting attention? What does it do for you as a human being? And holding on to that joy, I spoke about that a little bit earlier because I think it's really a theme to pay attention to, especially during a time when there's so much anxiety and stress, to remember this beauty in the craft that we're engaging in. Even on the difficult days where you feel like you just can't get any words out, to remember and to be kind to yourself and to try and enjoy it if you can in that particular moment. So there's my little stamp. I love YSU, and I do adore YSU. I can look back now, having my doctorate and having spent many years in higher education, going through grad school and whatnot. YSU gave me such a wonderful, wonderful education. I feel so blessed to have had an opportunity to go to school there, and I felt so well prepared heading into my later academic work and now as a professor. So I just wanted to give a quick thank you to my YSU professors who were so encouraging, met with me during office hours, helped me with individual projects, just were so giving and generous of their time, which I think is something that's a real theme, again, that runs through the faculty at YSU and makes it such a special university. It has big opportunities, but it feels like a small campus and a small community. And then also to Mogg Library for being the best work study a student could ever ask for. I worked there for 4 years, all through my undergraduate. I worked in the computer lab, checking students in, got a lot of homework done, got a lot of studying done, but also I got to work in the library where you're surrounded by all of this wonderful literature and information, and the most brilliant minds in the world are all in these stacks around you. And it was just such an excellent place to spend many of my undergraduate days. So thank you to Mogg for that. And then just also thank you for joining in on this particular WebEx. Thank you for having interest in my writing. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop sharing my screen. That way you can just see me and we can maybe have a little bit more of a discussion. And I know I'd love to see if there are any questions as well that I can answer. So let me go ahead and stop sharing. And that will hopefully pull to the video and you can see me. So are there any kind of questions or discussion you wanted to explore based on what I shared, just based on my experiences at YSU or what have you? Let me pause and just see what might come up for everyone. Oh, I see the question. What was your editing process like? So let me, it really depends on the publisher that you're working with. And so let me just describe the editing process with my first publisher and now with my current publisher. So my first publisher was a really small indie press. It was a small group, really a family that was running the press. And so the editing process ended up being where I sent the manuscript in, it was accepted. Several months later, I had one editor kind of do a large sweep through it and give me some kind of broader feedback. And that's where I had maybe some issues with character or plot that I needed to address. They're more substantive is what we refer to it as far as editing. Once I fixed those, went back to the editor, and then they ended up doing the copy editing and more of the typesetting, and everything was very, very quick with the first publisher. So I remember driving home from my daughter's county band, and I was getting all these messages from my publisher saying, they're doing the final edits, you need to respond. And I didn't realize it was going to be final edits in that one evening. So it was a little bit stressful. I remember these backcountry roads in Pennsylvania trying to send information about it. And it turned out to be, I think, a really great book. I'm very proud of A Flash of Red, but it was definitely a bit more of it was a little bit of a frenzied experience with the editing. With Bloodhound Books, what I find, again, because they're a larger publisher, they have a really big group of authors that they work with, which means they also have a big group of editors that they work with. And so again, it follows the same tracking where you submit your manuscript, it gets accepted, it goes to the editor, and I've been lucky to work with the same editor for both of my novels from Bloodhound, and she is just so on point. Oh gosh, there's really nothing better than a great, very keen editor, and her name is Lulu. And so she would make a pass through my manuscript, and she provides all of these comments about maybe inconsistencies, more of those, again, substantive edits, looking at the plot arc, looking at, especially for thrillers, making sure that I'm not revealing anything too soon, making sure that everything ties together in the story. And I'll go through and do that first pass of edits. It goes back to Lulu. We often do a second pass, and then it goes to a separate editor who's a copy editor who does all of the grammar checking and spell checking and everything. And it's been interesting working with a publisher who's based in the United Kingdom, because I can remember there was a piece in my novel, I think it was in the anniversary, where I mentioned how one of the characters carries mace, which, here in the US is this kind of protective spray or pepper spray. And in the UK, I remember my editor left a little comment. She says, it's mace. Could you put nutmeg instead? Does she carry spices in the bottom of her purse? And so I had to leave a comment back and say, well, in the US, we carry pepper spray and we call it mace. And so it's this kind of cultural difference in interpreting it. And that's been interesting to try and make sure that my novels are tracking with United Kingdom readers, because that's a big part of the publishing house's audience. And then also with American authors, because they, release the books here too and have a big presence in the US. So that is the main editing process. All right, here's another one. Sarah, you wanted to be a writer earlier in your life. Now, given your adult life as a writer, what neuroscience now tells us about an individual's brain formation, and that many writers do not begin to write until their 30s or later? What do you think about writers and writing now? Oh gosh, so we're getting into developmental science here too. Now, first off, let me just put a little disclaimer that I am not really cognizant of the scientific literature looking at writing in adulthood and neuroscience development. I am familiar with neuroscience development for infancy and childhood on into adolescence and looking at those environmental factors. But in thinking about that particular question, I would say, when I look back on my life, writing is really an ability that involves a lot of different, or it's a skill set really that involves a lot of different developmental skills that emerge really early on. You need to have good impulse control and emotion regulation, because you have to sit down and you have to accomplish this goal of writing. You have to engage in certain problem solving skills to make sure your story ties together. You have to have certain social and emotional skills. And so I think for any writer who's crafting characters that are relatable to readers, who's crafting a good page-turning story, they have to be able to, they can look to early experiences in their development. And I mentioned how Mrs. Lippiatt, my English teacher in elementary school on into middle school, just how formative and how thankful I am to have had such a wonderful, supportive educational presence in my life. And I probably wouldn't be writing today if I didn't have that person really cheering me on in the educational setting and telling me that I could do it. And of course, I had wonderful parents too who were encouraging me as well, but they weren't English individuals. They weren't writers. Mrs. Lippiatt was, and she kept telling me I could do it, I could get better. And I think that's instilled in me for a long time now as a result. Okay. So
We had a question from Facebook from Dana. She says, how do you deal with rejections?
I'm laughing because it is a work in progress, isn't it? It's interesting because it's being a writer and being an educator at a university where I'm in two positions where you're often receiving a lot of feedback about your performance quite regularly. And that's something that I've had to really develop a practice in how to interpret it and how to not internalize it so much. So I think, I've been teaching 15 years, my undergraduates at Penn State, who I adore, much like I adore our YSU students too. And I've had a lot of practice in being able to identify when feedback is going to be valuable to me and when feedback is something that I don't need to hang on to it. And so when you are in the writing process and you're sending your material out, you have to recognize, again, you're not going to be well suited for everybody. You have to anticipate you're going to get rejections because it is such a tight fit between an author getting published with a publisher. There are a lot of wonderful writers out there, but finding that right connection and the right market for your book and making sure that everything kind of connects is really difficult. And I've heard a lot of writers talk about how it's a numbers game often where you have to send out a lot of submissions in order to hopefully find that one special agent or that one special publisher where your book is going to be placed and recognized for what it is. And so it's something that I don't have up here on my screen, but I keep an Excel spreadsheet when I was querying before I found my publisher of everywhere that I sent my novel, all the agents, all the publishers. And I'd say there were maybe 50 to 70, depending on the manuscript. And a lot of them, I had a little column that said the date submitted, and then I had accept or decline or request sometimes agents will request half your manuscript, sometimes they'll request a full manuscript to read it, and even then, oftentimes they're rejecting it because only so many books they can accept every year. So a lot of those is a big chunk that just say reject, reject, reject. And it's good training for your inner compassion. And just recognizing that all writers have gone through that process and to really focus on the value that you see in your own writing experience. That goes back to one of the lessons I mentioned is that why else do you do it besides wanting to get published or wanting to sell your book or wanting people to say they like your writing? What is your internal motivation? And to hang on to that because it's really easy to lose sight of that in the midst of everything else. So that's my that's my way to handle rejection is to be kind to yourself and to anticipate that it's going to happen. Let's see, I'm looking through the chats here too. Let's see, how do you deal with rejections? There's one here from Babs Mouse. Did you ever wonder while writing, will readers like this at any time during your process? And I think that gets again to that essential quality we've been talking about, which is, why we write. And certainly a big part of why anybody writes, I think, is to make sure that we have readers who are going to enjoy it. That's part of why we create art, is for it to be enjoyed. And so there are absolutely times where I'll be writing a scene, like there's a scene in The Anniversary where it's this honeymooning couple and they're in the hot tub and it's kind of romantic and amorous. And then there's like all this kind of suspense that gets built in. And as I'm writing it, I'm like, oh, this is so fun. I hope readers really enjoy this. And so certainly that's part in the back of my mind, is to be thinking about, who are readers going to find this enticing, and are they going to want to keep turning the pages? But I think also an important question is, would I enjoy it as a reader myself? Because I think we often are writing material that we also enjoy reading. I know for me, most of the books that I read are thrillers or psychological suspense. And so I have a lot of wonderful models and other authors to think about, okay, how can I craft my novel to be something that I would enjoy as a reader and hopefully other readers would enjoy as well? I'm gonna go take a little sip of water here too.
I was wondering, when you, were first getting started with writing, what was the best money you ever spent as a writer?
Oh,
Was it on equipment? Was it on an experience? Was it training?
it's a great question, because I think especially with social media, there are a lot of advertisements for writing. There are a lot of advertisements for workshops and retreats and all of those things. And I think when it comes down to it, the best money that I spent was maybe not specifically on writing itself. And this goes back to something that I've seen Joyce Carol Oates note about. Not that I'm comparing the two of us, she's prolific and a master, and oh my goodness. But she talked about one of the main difficulties that you have as a writer is just being interrupted and finding time. And so for me, it was more so kind of figuring out in my life, how could I maybe utilize uh, our finances in a way where I would get that hour each day to get a little bit of writing done. What could I do to kind of distribute the domestic responsibilities and my professional responsibilities? So for, my husband and I, one thing that I think is like the best money we've ever spent, it's just that, when I have time off from working as an academic, I'm not sitting around and making sure that I'm having to like do the dusting and the vacuuming, or I'm having to like, coordinate my family with my husband to get the house clean. So before the social distancing, we were really lucky to find someone who could come and clean the house for us every 2 weeks. And that way I would have a little bit of time. And my husband also has like his own, hobbies and interests too. And he would have time. I want to make it clear we split the domestic responsibilities. It's not my job to keep the house clean or anything. But just having that time in order to devote to my writing and to not feel guilty as I'm doing it, that I need to be doing something else. And that's also part of a mental a mental shift too that you have to allow yourself for. So I guess that would be my more so than workshops or books on writing or anything. It's just creating an area in your life or a time where you can actually get the writing done. Oh, here we go. I've got another question. Babs Mouse, what process do you use to set up the start of the storyline, to set up the story? Do you take on the persona of the character? Do you act it out? Oh, if I act it out, oh my gosh. So if you guys read my novels, again, there's a lot of malice and intrigue. That would be so funny to act it out. It would be fun to do it. And unfortunately, I do not act out my characters. What I do usually is I get a lot of ideas for my writing when I'm walking, and also like when I'm washing my hair in the shower. Go figure. And I know that's kind of a thing to talk about shower thoughts. So oftentimes, especially when I'm first starting a novel, I write in the morning. I do what's called morning pages, because if I don't write in the morning, I'm not going to get it done the rest of the day. The rest of life takes over, even if I've tried to craft it so it doesn't. So I have to get it done in the morning first thing. And so when I'm in the shower, getting ready for the day, I'm scrubbing my hair and I'm thinking, what would this character do? Oh, what's going to happen there? Where did the knife go? Okay. um, so I end up doing a lot of thinking. And then also, and I can send a link to it on the Facebook page, I just wrote a little piece for New Lit Salon about this post-it note technique that I use, which is essentially where I will put post-it notes out and it will have each of the different plot points or elements of the character. And again, because I write thrillers, it's so much about information you're giving to the reader about what's happening and what has happened, in order to reveal this, what's going to really create the tension for the characters and what's creating that again, that kind of sense of foreboding is what you try to create in a lot of these types of books. And so I'll have my post-it notes, I'll set it out on a table, on the kitchen table. And I love that they're post-it notes because you can move them around. And that's oftentimes what I have to do when I'm plotting my novels, is to make sure like, oh, that little backstory is revealed too early or too late. I need to negotiate it. And by doing that, it makes it a lot easier than to go into edits or to go into fully writing again and make sure that all the content is being revealed at the right time and that the character arcs are tracking accurately.
All right. Well, this was fantastic, I think. Thank you so much, Sarah, for your time. and for being willing and game to do this virtually, with like no notice. So I appreciate it.
Oh, it was
Um,
such a joy, and I'm always happy to connect with my Youngstown State, uh, community.
Very good. And we did link to your website on the Facebook page. And Angela thanks you for your commitment to the English Festival as well. She says they missed you.
Oh, yes. Oh, I have so many great memories of the English Festival too. That's a whole other chapter of my writing growth that we could talk about. So yeah, thank you for reminding me of that as well. And thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Well, and I know you're on Twitter. Do you do any other social media?
I do. I do the Twitter. I do Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And that's something that if you go onto my website, you'll see links for the different social media. But certainly, if people are watching, I had my email included at the end. And if anyone has questions about the publishing experience or writing resources or just connecting with the writing community, especially as crime writers and thriller writers, we're very, very nice people, and we're very, very nice to all of each other online. There's a very vibrant writing community on Twitter, especially like I mentioned for crime fiction. And I encourage you to check it out and to get connected through social media in that very nice, pleasant, supportive pocket of the writing community.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of the day and stay safe.
Wonderful. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Bye.